Hey, Anya, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you for taking the time. I know that you're very busy, and congratulations on your new position. You found a full-time CEO, and now you're taking Belcampo at another level. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm now the chair of the board and co-founder of Belcampo. So I have been the operational CEO for a decade
Okay.
um, and built the whole business from the ground up. And we're getting really big now, or
It's
we
a good
have
problem.
to get big. And it's kind of like in life, do I want to spend the next 10 years building a massive like logistics supply chain, or focusing more on the pieces of the brand that I love and work on? And, as a board chair, I'm still, accountable. But I'm focusing now on the product R&D. So all the new product and innovation. I do all the sales. So we're launching with a very big retailer this spring, and I'm managing that account. And I'm also overseeing just the brand and integrity of the brand. So it's basically what I've been doing already for about a year, but it's formalizing that, and it's just exciting for me to have the my goal is also to get to a place where I can start to kind of learn a lot more again. Um, in particular, after driving the company through COVID, so I was the operational CEO through COVID, and I led the company to 10% year-on-year growth in COVID. Um, and it was great. It was really exciting, but it was also like a lot.
I
And
bet.
the timing couldn't be better. I have to say, if I hadn't had COVID, I probably would be a little bit more like, oh, I want to kind of like do a little bit more, or I really, but I'm like, no, I had this huge win at the end of that decade. I'm running the company, so it's exciting. It's fun.
It's been a catalyst to speed up a lot of businesses, this COVID that we're going through.
We went from being a restaurant company with a farm to being actually a meat brand. So
Well, I'm
huge.
looking forward to it. I mean, congratulations on this new partnership. Spring is actually around the corner, in my opinion. So we'll be seeing it pretty soon. What is the difference between Bel Campo meats and other meats?
Our practices are all oriented towards supporting meat that supports human wellness. And that also has the benefit of being good for the planet and good for animals' health, right? But broadly, unfortunately, much of American food delivers on the promise of being inexpensive. That's what it does well, is cheap. If cheap can be done well, right? Like what
That's a
it
good,
excels at is being affordable.
right.
And we at Belcampo, our goal has been to unwind that, to say we're not going to focus on just price point, but we're going to actually focus on the impact on wellness. How do I make a protein, a natural animal protein, that's as healthy for you as possible?
And what does that mean? Like, is there a difference in the way you raise the cattle?
So meat is intrinsically an extremely healthy food. And when I say intrinsically, I mean in the way that it was raised evolutionarily in history. It was an extremely healthy food. In fact, it's the food that like entire civilizations were oriented around procuring, right?
Right,
Look
right.
at the way that, like civilizations evolved, a lot of it was around access to meat. And it's an aberration in the past 30 or 40 years that we started to make meat into a food that's very unhealthful. And we've done that by switching the diet of animals to foods that make them get fat quickly. And the kind of like, oh, duh, realization for me in that is we share a ton of our DNA with animals. So if we switch them to a diet that makes them gain weight extremely quickly, then it's obviously going to have, the same time that happened, we as a culture and society started to gain weight really quickly and to struggle with obesity. So we're talking about really change in the past 30 or 40 years, which correlate with a major shift in the American diet that resulted in diet-related diseases being the number one killer in our country, right? So we are
That's
eating
correct.
ourselves to death, right?
Hmm.
And at the same time, we've created effectively feeding programs for animals that make them obese.
And is there like, because I don't know anything about farming. So I just want to put this in context with people just like me that just shop and I look at organic meat. I'm like, okay, I'm buying organic meat because I feel like it's more or it's safer or it's better for me than regular meat.
Mhm.
But can you tell me what the life cycle of the cattle is? Is there a big difference between getting them fat versus them just being fat or growing in a normal way? Is there a significant difference in the life cycle?
Absolutely. So cows evolved eating pastures, and they're a ruminant. So it plays a really interesting role in the ecosystem because they can eat very low value, high fiber foods in abundance, and they can turn those into very high quality protein. So that's things like grass, right? You or I, were we to eat grass, we would die within probably 2 weeks, right? Just
Right. Yeah. Huh.
we're called a monogastric, which means mono, one gastric stomach. We have one stomach. Cows are ruminants. They have 5 stomachs. And the reason they have 5 stomachs is that there's various sort of stages of processing needed to take this extremely low value food of grass and turn it into high quality meat and energy for that animal. So they're very, very tuned into a very specific diet. Now, just like us, cows will, if they're given a very carbohydrate dense diet, get inflamed and gain weight quickly. So the modern agricultural system has just done that for cows. They've put them on a grain, corn, and soy intense diet. And by doing so, they, in a very traditional agricultural system, cows would be eaten after like between 6 and 12 years. In a system like Belcampo's, it's 30 months, 26 to 30 months. And that's actually government regulations because you can't take cows above a certain age in the US and slaughter them a certain way. And in confinement agriculture, they reach that full weight in 16 months typically.
So, I mean, by 50%, holy cow.
So think about it. In America, the average age of puberty for girls in the past 2 decades has dropped from age 13 to age 9.
Right.
Okay. And in our cows, we did the same thing. So when we say that they are fat at 16 months or they're fully adult, it means they go through puberty a couple months earlier as well. So we have the similar thing. It's like when you give animals this really high carbohydrate intense inflamed diet, there's 2 things that are happening. One is like they gain a lot of weight. There's a sense of abundance of resources, and it's also inflammatory. And that's a signifier of like potential death too. Part of like, this is kind of a crazy thing, but in chickens, the way that they increase egg production is a process called forced molting. And forced molting is effectively cycles of like feast and famine, and the starvation cycle, they push out eggs. Because when animals are super sick or, in unhealth or in broad patterns of unhealth, they actually briefly will become more fertile. So this structure of like feeding cows, basically human feed, and putting on this really inflammatory diet. If you cut open the stomach of a cow on grain, it's black and shiny. And it's so unappealing. And it's incredible. It's like a thick animal. If you cut open the stomach of a Belcampo cow, it's grassy and it smells like compost. The crazy thing too is people come up to our farm and they're like, how am I on a cow farm? This place smells amazing. They're sleeping outside in tents and there's like zero feeling of like discomfort. It doesn't smell bad. It's one of the, like, it feels like you're in nature. And they're like, how are there 3,000 beef here? This doesn't make any sense. And it's like, well, also animals on a natural diet don't smell as bad, first off. I think we all know that from our own selves, like even the way, if you're eating poorly, your whole body changes, right? And the way you smell changes. And in like, same thing as when you're under stress, right? There's all these changes. But cows manure when they're eating, this really high fiber diet, doesn't smell very bad. And they're also not dense, right? Mm-hmm. So that total smell of death around like what we drive by on the I-5 in near Bakersfield of Harris Ranch, that isn't anything like our farm. All that slick black manure and everything. Our manure is like brown and full of sprouts and seeds and stuff. It's a very different animal. So you basically, it's like to make a cow into an American cow, you take it's as if you're taking a person and saying, you're just going to eat Fritos.
And the standard American diet, the SAD diet.
Yeah. And you put them on this very high omega-6, so lots of seed fat, lots of, whereas in the reason that grass-fed beef is healthier for our bodies is that, and this is something that we test regularly at our company, it has a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2 omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. And a 1-to-1 ratio is actually the key ratio for health. And in the American diet, available omega-3 to 6 ratio is 1-to-30. So
It's a big difference.
Yeah. And, you can correct it in some ways, right? And so the question that you might have is like, well, I could just eat, fish oil and get my omega-3s. But the ratio of the two is actually important. It's not about absolutes, like getting a certain number of omega-3s. I take fish oils, it's great. But it's more important to actually avoid omega-6s as opposed to an absolute achievement of omega-3s. So you're really, the decks is stacked against you, right? And so the problem with our beef is that we've made our beef and lamb to some degree into something that's actually toxic for our bodies because we've created a product. I mean, I've tested this in my competitor's product that is a 1-to-20 to 1-to-30 omega-3 to 6 ratio. So it's not a ratio that supports good health. And it's actually a ratio that supports inflammation. And I think oftentimes people are like, oh yeah, meat makes me sick, or I have a sore stomach when I eat meat, or I have meat hangovers. Like, yeah, it's because you're inflamed, because it's an inflammatory product when it's made commercially, the way that we make it in the US.
I mean, that is new to me. I remember we were chatting before we started our interview that I would get I'll actually pay the extra money, get organic meat from, big retail stores. And then I would get the ground beef and make hamburgers. And then I would use your meat and cook the same way. And I realized the smell from your meat is very different. And the stench that I would get from my older meat would stay in my house for much longer, sometimes the whole day if I don't air it out. But yours, it has a cleaner smell and it doesn't stick around that long. Is there a difference, or is that just me?
No, I have the same experience, occasionally, like for a photo shoot or something, I'll cook another person's meat. Like one time we couldn't get our turkeys in time and I cooked an organic turkey from a large retailer, and I make all my meat into broth because I don't want to throw it away. And, and my house just stunk. And I get these DMs on Instagram, people like, oh, you make broth all the time. Like, how do you not have your house stink? And I'm like, my house smells fabulous. Like my kids are like, what's cooking when the broth's on? But when I cook other people's meat, I'm like, it smells dank. It just smells kind of gross. Mm-hmm. And so I have some theories about why. And there is a spectrum of my theories. One is like sort of documented, to then the other end is just really woo. So I'll start with documented. But so even if you're buying from organic and grass-fed animal producer, you don't have any mandates or control over post-harvest handling, which means everything that happens after the animal dies. So conventional operations, and even small scale operations, often they're slaughtering at very large slaughterhouses that are really kind of lowest common denominator. So it's not really the attention to detail. We actually have our own slaughterhouse and process our animals there. And we are, constantly gearing our practices towards, small scale, very, very careful handling the product after harvest. It's very different from a large scale operation where it's really about just get the animals through. So you have more potential there for like oxidation, rancidity, more people touching the product, more post-harvest handling. That's where I think like you've got in the USDA and in general, the mentality, like, let's cook all of our beef to 165 degrees or our poultry to 165 and our beef to 150 or something. Right. Awful. It tastes terrible. I don't want to eat poultry at 165. I want poultry at 130. That's tender and delicious. That's when my kids want a second piece of chicken. And if it's 165, it's like chewing through it. Like I got to cover it with teriyaki sauce and slice it fine to make it palatable. That's I want my palatable with just salt on it. And to do that, I can't overcook it. All right. So all that overcooking is mandated by poor post-harvest handling, right? Which is when you have more potential for putrefaction and for contamination. So one of it is just like, how is the meat handled in these large plants? That's one piece. Second piece, with specifically the producer of grass-fed and organic meat, I'll notice that many grass-fed producers don't take their animals old enough. They process their animals at like 18 months, and on the grass diet, they don't go through puberty until like 16 months. So they're not fully finished. Adolescent animals have a tendency to develop kind of off flavors. So you'll get sometimes like liver flavors or kind of fishy flavors and things like that. And that usually is like kind of hormonal pubescent animals. So another issue is like many grass-fed producers are just hustling to get the product to market and not focus enough, I think, on product quality, because they're kind of selling the meat on the environmental values, not on the taste. I want to sell meat on human wellness and taste. And part of wellness is that it's really enjoyable to eat. You know, I think that's fundamental. Right. Wellness is like loving to eat and eating good food. So you got to have attention to the whole, length of life, and then the maturity and readiness to harvest. And so I'll say this as a grass-fed and finished beef operator of many of my fellow grass-fed and beef operators, I don't see always this attention to finishing time, to making sure the animal is fully ready for harvest. And then the third area, this is my more woo area, is that animals under confinement, in the confinement animal system, this is particularly for the monogastrics, chickens and pigs, and also for cows. Like a lot of the way that they're gaining weight quickly, or part of the picture, is that they're under extreme stress. And extreme stress is a constant cortisol load. And you'll actually even see it sometimes in product in the market, like there'll be slight dark spots in products, and it's usually taken out, like those products aren't sold, but you'll see them occasionally. I've definitely seen it in slaughterhouses. It's like this, in the same way that humans under stress, we gain belly fat under stress.
COVID's the best petri dish right now. You see that everywhere.
Everywhere. So humans under high cortisol load, we put on, and then a lot of liquid calories help with that. But I even read just recently that women, when you have a baby, you liquidate fat stores to make your baby healthy, and those fat stores are DHAs, which come from animals. So if women have DHAs in their diet over time from fish and meat, they'll be pulling it out of their own body. And the more you pull from your own body, the more likely you are to put on tummy after you have a baby. So if you look at that too, like a way that American women struggle with postpartum recovery, it's also like related to having impoverished diets. We have plenty of calories, but our diets are impoverished. They don't have enough nutrition, right? We hit all the calorie counts, we exceed calorie counts, but we don't hit the micronutrient profile. So because of that, our bodies suffer. So in confinement pigs, you'll actually see that they have big guts.
That's not normal, because that's what I see in the pictures. That's not normal.
Big. I mean, our pigs are big all over. They're muscly. They got big fat, they got big shoulders. They got big jowls. Confinement pigs are like more slack. They're not a muscular. They don't move, and they have more just adipose tissue. So in general, there's and pigs are the animals that are most genetically similar to humans of the animals that we eat. But so I'd say from a woo perspective, there's something to me around just like cortisol and stress in the animals, and the way that makes them smell, and a long-term accumulation of some of these stress and fear hormones. That's really can actually in some way be pervasive in the flavor. So that's my experience, particularly like with confinement chicken and confinement pork. When I cook it, I get this like bad smell, and it's like a sad smell. And so this is where I say it's really woo, but I think that has something to do. It's definitely probably post-harvest handling. It's probably poor quality of grain, but also keep in mind that these chickens, when they're in a hoop house like that, they're in their own poop. They're eating their own waste. They're sometimes fed parts of other animals. Chickens are carnivores too. They're omnivores. So are pigs. Like they can eat bugs and stuff and be healthy, but like they're fed chicken waste from other animals. Like there's just some if they say, vegetarian fed, they're not. But broadly, these animals are just not in a situation where they're eating clean, right? And so the smell of it, to me, it smells just dirty.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's much woo to it, because the best example right now is with COVID, that stress does change your body. Stress and affects everything you do. But with you talking about chickens, let's talk about chickens. I have listened to some of your past speeches, and after listening to it, I just don't touch chicken that much, if not anymore, unless I get it from your store. What is the public not realizing about chicken meat when they buy it?
So 60% of meat consumed in America is chicken. It has become the most popular meat. And so also the most radical shift in our consumption patterns in the past century. Chicken used to be the least frequent meat consumed because it was incredibly expensive, right? It's delicious, it's quick to cook.
Yeah.
But it used to be very expensive because it used to take, the average chicken sold in America in the 1940s and 50s was over 50 weeks at slaughter. The chickens that we eat today that are available in like Trader Joe's or something, those are 2.5 weeks at slaughter.
So from 1 year to 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
We can get is like 8 to 10 weeks for our chickens that are outdoors and eating natural grass. Now, keep in mind, they don't eat, this is a really key thing to know. And people that I know that are very well educated in nutrition make this mistake where they say that chickens, they need to have a high diet and like pasture is about their nutrition. And chickens naturally will always prefer to eat grain, right?
Okay.
If they're omnivores, they're monogastrics. Cows, for example, if you put grain out at pasture, they usually have to be kind of forced to eat it and try it. They don't naturally gravitate towards it. They'll gravitate towards grass that has seed pods on it, but they don't want to eat grain. They want to eat green grass and walk around.
I didn't know that. Okay.
They evolved to eat that. Pigs and chickens, if you put them out in a green grassy field, lots of bugs and stuff, the maximum amount of their calories that they'll get from the grass and the bugs is like 10%. So that's like why it's even more shocking, because whereas in grass-fed and finished cattle, I can say, oh yeah, our system and all the regenerative farms out there, it's a radically different diet. It's like Fritos versus chard. In chicken, it's kind of scarier because they're eating grain in our system and they're eating grain in everybody's system. And so what's the delta? Like, how is that so different? How is it from even our system where they're eating grain, it's 10 weeks, and their system where they're eating grain, it's 2 weeks? That's even more frightening because it's like you're changing fewer variables, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the way that change happens is in the stressfulness of the environment. So it's a very confined environment. They have just a few inches to move around in. The animals are actually under so much stress that they will peck each other to death if they're allowed to keep their beaks. So their beaks are cut off and they're fed a liquid food to avoid them having. Now, even on Belcampo's farm, there's always like 1 or 2 chickens that are missing a patch of feathers. You'll see that even if you have backyard chickens, it's a hierarchy in the bird flock, and they'll pick
nature. It's basically nature.
It's like a run to the litter. But so that thing that we're in our operation, there's one that's like kind of getting to eat last and getting a little bit more beat up. In the operations that are confined, that is all heightened. So they actually will kill each other. And they, despite being debeaked, many of them are still like, picking at each other and at themselves enough that they've lost a lot of their feathers. They're kept in the dark, and the toxicity in the hoop houses is so high. And this is a study from the Pew Charitable Trust, which did a really like watershed analysis of CAFOs, of confined animal operations, a couple of years back. They showed that in these confinement animal hoop houses, that if the ventilation systems break, that all humans and animals have to be vacated within 9 minutes because the levels of toxicity in the air are so heavy that without the ventilation system, everything living in the hoop house will be dead within 9 minutes.
I don't know how to answer that. That's like chickens will die. There's no way you could pull everybody out in 9 minutes.
Also, any humans, any workers in there will die. Right. And it's not enough to open the doors. Like, it's like they need these massive ventilation. So that gives you a sense of like the level of nitrogen, ammonia, and off-gassing and everything that's happening in there. So it's that environment. So basically it's a super stressful environment. The animals are fed a dose of antibiotics in their food. Even when they're saying them on the package, it'll say if it says no antibiotics, and then it'll be caveated, like in Tyson was saying, unless the animals are sick. Well, it's been documented. There's a great book all about this called The Meat Racket that you should check out.
Okay.
That Tyson has, veterinarians on payroll who will attest to the risk of flocks getting sick. And so all the animals are given them as if they're about to have an epidemic, right? So they're
so it's a loophole they're playing through. Oh, I see now.
So they're constantly saying, yes, these animals are right on the cusp of getting sick. This whole hoop house is on the cusp of getting sick, right? So they'll say that kind of thing. And what happens? Obviously, they're able to then put the antibiotics into their food. And the antibiotics, in a totally isolated double-blind study, antibiotics have been shown in and of themselves to increase rate of weight gain by 1.5 times. So that's one big factor right there. And then the other factors are environmental. It's the same thing too. I think about it as like, imagine like the times in your life when you're not eating well, you're not getting your morning sunshine, you're under feeling some social stress, or you're competing for the attention of a person, or you're not being recognized at work, or, like those are the moments when we gain weight, when we develop kind of compulsive behavior, where we have obsessive thought. Like, so I don't know if the chickens are like OCD or having obsessive thought, but like there's definitely some parallels to learn from our human experience, where you'd say, yeah, if you were in that situation, you'd gain 30 pounds in a week too.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be. It makes no sense. I mean, I'm still shocked. I mean, because look, I'm just a consumer buying meat that the beaks are chopped off and they're given liquid diet. That will mess with their head no matter what. I mean, I'm not a veterinarian. I don't have a science degree, but yeah, just thinking about that, well, it'll mess with their heads, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to know, and this has kind of been the challenge. It's like the question of like consciousness in animals. And that's when it's a kind of a bridge too far for consumers to think about. And, strangely enough, I think the people who think about it the most, and probably the most articulately, are the militant vegans, right?
Right.
But I'm thinking about it as a militant non-vegan. And I think it's not even really a question about like doing right. At the end of the day, it's like a question about just wellness and health. I don't think that humans can be optimally healthy if we're eating plants and animals that are not optimally healthy. And, diet is the number one cause of disease in America. And it's not just about eating refined carbohydrates. It's not just about like cereal or sugar. It's the actual quality of the food we produce is not optimal for human nutrition in the US. And so if you're going to go for optimal nutrition, you have to look for things that are produced differently. You can't trust your mainstream grocery store, and you can't trust the government for just like, oh yeah, they figured it out, this is safe and healthy. It's not. It might be safe if you overcook it, but that's kind of all you can guarantee.
When you were in Europe, let me, because I would go to France once in a while, and I do feel a difference because I try to stay away from carbs and grains, especially in the US. But I have friends that would have heartburn when they eat grains in the US, or ravioli or bread or whatever. And then let's say we go to Paris or Cannes, and we have the ravioli there and we have the bread there, and he doesn't feel any heartburn at all. Do you feel that difference, or is there something there?
Absolutely. It has to do with the use of Roundup in our country. That's my validated theory. So in Europe, there are no genetically modified crops, and genetically modified crops are crops that have been modified to be resistant to an extremely potent herbicide. And that potent herbicide is glyphosate, and that is Roundup, right? So when people are talking about like GMO corn, what's the gene that's been altered? It's a gene called the BT gene, which effectively it's actually from a plant, it's from an oak tree, and it's resistant to this extremely powerful herbicide, pesticide, chemical, right? This very powerful chemical. And so this one gene makes these plants not destroyed by this potent herbicide, right? This, you see these people spraying this shit on their lawn, crazy people, right? And then they all get cancer, but like those people spraying that on. Right. Okay, so if think about it in your body, like we all want to have probiotics. What are biotics, right? They're bacteria that are good, that live in our gut, and that are things like, all the good stuff in sauerkraut is probiotics, and we've got billions of them in our gut. They're fundamentally like a single-celled organism, right? It's a plant, it's a vegetable. It's the same thing. It's a living single-celled biological organism. When you have a potent broadband herbicide that you ingest in small quantities, what's going to die? Your microbiome. So when you eat wheat that's tainted with glyphosate, you're going to get a die-off of your microbiome. It's been demonstrated very clearly that glyphosate has that impact on soil. So soil also has a microbiome. And when we talk about carbon in soil and soil carbon sequestration, it's effectively, if soil has more organic matter and has more life in it, it takes more carbon into it. And then the carbon in the soil in turn makes the microbiome of the soil richer. And then that's why the broccoli has more oomph, right? So that the broccoli from organic farms has been shown to have like 5 times of all the antioxidants that the broccoli from the crappy farms. Why is that? It's not just that they're growing faster or something per se. It's actually because the soil has more stuff in it, and that stuff goes into the plant. So any plant that grows off of richer soil is richer. No brainer, right? So what the glyphosate has been shown to do to soil is kill the microbiome. It has a totally analogous impact on our own microbiome. The reason people are getting sick from wheat in the US is that even organic wheat has been shown to be tainted with glyphosate. Because when you have genetically modified wheat, what you do then is you don't have to weed it anymore. Like your grandpa was out there weeding with a tractor. Your great grandpa was out there weeding with horses. Today's farmer, they just fly a plane over and spray this potent herbicide all over it. And everything except for the plants that are genetically modified dies. Okay. And no matter when in the life cycle of the plant, it's sprayed with this potent herbicide, it still has a ton of it on it when it's harvested, and it's never washed off of it. Okay. So you've got saturation of the plants with this potent herbicide that this one plant is resistant to. And that plant is impregnated with it, and it ends up throughout the life cycle of that product. So if you look to there's an environmental working group, EWG online, they've done a bunch of studies where they test lots of consumer products, organic granola bars, rice cakes, everything is tainted with it now in the food supply. And it's tiny amounts. It's not like there's like grams of it and things, but there's tiny amounts. There's less of it in organic stuff. But the thing is, there's only, I think it's a 9-foot buffer between an organic farm and a non-organic farm. And so if you're spraying over with, it's there, it's in the waterways, it's in the water, it's everywhere. So I actually, so part of the reason that we farm up in Siskiyou County, one reason, it's cheap, inexpensive land. Cattle is not high volume. So it's an affordable place to farm livestock in California. The other reason is that there's nobody up there. It's desolate. There's not a lot of farming culture, and there's no GMOs. So it's not like Fresno and things where there's GMOs. So you actually don't get spraying of glyphosate. I mean, people use it, a little bit, and mostly like for ornamental stuff, but it's not common. So you have to look for products from areas that are remote. I actually, being very concerned about this, but also loving to eat bread, and I want my kids to not be weird about things like that.
You want them to enjoy.
I don't want them to be like the kids that eat just like McDonald's for a decade. I was so restrictive with them. Right. So I bake all the time for them and bake with them, but I buy my flour directly from a small mill in Maine, and it's expensive, but it's not like anymore. I mean, it's like in these things, you're like, oh my God, I'm spending $300 on 6 months of flour. And it's like, yeah, but you can spend $300 on coffees in LA in 2 months. You know what I mean? So
that's true.
Probably, what's this do for my health? And so what we do is we buy directly from the Stone Grand Mill. It's all organic. It's isolated. I buy for my family every 6 months, and I get a big box of it shipped. And people will, if I have friends who are like not celiac, but are like, grain doesn't agree with me, I'm like, try my stuff. They do. And they're like, it's fine. Of course it's fine. It's like, it doesn't have, I really think the glyphosate is a thing. Elevated gluten levels are a thing too, but gluten's a protein. It's not like in and of itself highly inflammatory, and I think unless you're from a very specific region that with like an indigenous, tendency towards one thing, or you have a genetic predisposition to celiac, I think a lot of people, when they're responding to gluten, are really responding more to glyphosate.
Wow, that's an answer right there. I did not know that. Let me ask you this with Roundup. Because you did say that when Roundup sprays a farmland, that all the plants that are not GMO die. So does Roundup sell the seeds as well?
Yes. Yeah.
So they sell the seeds, and then they sell the fertilizer or the pesticides.
Package. And it's actually,
it's a monopoly then, isn't it?
That these farmers that got into that system are making far less money than they used to. Because the seed prices are set by this company, by Monsanto, and then the price of the chemical that's needed to make the seeds thrive. Because if you buy a GMO crop, it doesn't in and of itself do better. It does better when you spray it with this one chemical. It's designed to interact with this one chemical.
So that's a monopoly, in my opinion, right? Or it's
and
a system. You have to buy into the system.
yeah, and the company has been shown to be doing some really nefarious business practices.
Yeah,
Like,
there's a couple lawsuits out there from what I hear.
it's not, I mean, listen, it's like farmers are not people who get into this business because they like being told what to do. They like, having a boss. Like farming is ultimate, like entrepreneur, scrappy, do things from scratch, do things your own way. You're in charge, you're your own boss. So getting farmers to buy into the system took a lot, and it's been a pretty corrupt and sleazy way that they've gone about it. And now farms are showing, like you can see, just Google this, you'll find that there's lots of farms that are like, I'm making less money than I used to. I owe more money to more people now. And I'm beholden and I don't have my dignity anymore. Effectively, it's kind of killing farming. A lot of people are rejecting it. But now, unfortunately, there's just, it's so pervasive and so widespread. We really, now we're on the cusp. Just a couple of days ago, the FDA did a preliminary MOU around the development of GMO pigs, that they would be permitted in the US as well. I mean, this is just continuing to spread. We've taken this really hook, line, and sinker, and we're just running after the GMO. People get freaked out with GMOs, like that the gene splicing itself is the problem. And I'm like, that doesn't really worry me. A piece of an oak tree being inside of a corn plant, could be a problem, maybe. I'm some of the weirder stuff, like, with human genes going, or salmon genes going into, that's I'm less in favor of, but like plant to plant gene splicing, with enough decades, you could actually do that naturally. That's what plants do, right? But it's the chemical interaction. It's what they're geared to do that we should be afraid of, not the genetic splicing in and of itself.
I don't know if this is, again, I'm not a farmer, but why can a farmer move away from GMO plants or GMO crops to regular crops? Is there a high barrier of entry or a high cost to move to more of natural crops?
So going organic, this would be the more extreme version. And I'd say many people are doing it. And that's been the trend. I mean, organic is the fastest growing agriculture segment in the US, and has been for like 20 years, just every year, just boom, boom, boom. It's growing and growing. And I have a lot of optimism about that trend. But actually going organic, if you're a row crop farmer, it's a 3-year transition, and you can't charge organic prices until you're fully transitioned. So it's expensive. And it's a different skill set. And a lot of times, if you've been using chemicals for years, your land is impoverished, and it takes, 5 or 6 years to bring it back. And often animals are part of bringing it back. Manure and the natural cycle of bringing animals in is part of it. But it's a whole different skill set. It's a different way of doing things. It's less mechanized. And then the way of just saying, well, I'm not going to use GMO, I'm just going to go GMO free but conventional, that is definitely growing. And it's definitely growing. And the problem is that sometimes there are multi-year contracts for this. There's another piece of things is that GMO seeds are engineered to not be able to be saved. So you can't.
Really? Wow. Okay.
So they're engineered so that if, it's like here in my office, I have my dried beans from my garden from last year. And every year we, take a couple pods of beans and put them in a jar. It's like, great, next year, here's the beans. I don't do it for the hard stuff like tomatoes, but the beans are easy, right? But like we all have experience with what it means to save a seed, and then you plant it the next year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. Those seeds from the GMO crops are actually designed to be infertile. So you can't, they hamper your ability to control your own destiny. And some of them are fertile, but it's actually, you're penalized if they find out that you saved your seeds.
It's funny how all this is driven of trying to make food as cheap as possible, and you're really giving up a lot.
Huge trade-offs. And there are decisions that we've accepted, but we didn't make. And it's like we've given away our power. And we've given away the power and agency we have in our own health in exchange for cheap prices. And then on the other side of things, we pay more per person for healthcare in the US and in this country. I mean, it's a developed country, like we pay massive premiums to fix it now that it's broken. And I also just think it's sort of, disheartening to me. It's like I see people spending hundreds of dollars on supplements every month because our food is nutritionally bereft. I take supplements now. I didn't as a kid, but I do because it's like, well, I'm not sure if I'm getting all my nutrients from things. I'm not sure. And it's also sad too. It's like, I think with COVID, my life has changed for the better in many ways, being home, being able to get sunlight, not being on an airplane all the time. But, for a while I'm taking vitamin D because I'm not even sure I'm going to get sunlight. Like our world has taken away all these kind of like things that we used to take for granted. And it's exchange for what? Like a phone where you can get toilet paper dropped into your front yard in 1 hour, who cares? Yeah. And was that worth it? I don't know. But like, there's a lot of trade-offs that we made that have a very, very high cost. And I think in health, I encourage people to take a step back and say, yeah, you're dropping like $12 on a green juice. You're dropping, $30 on this supplement. What if you took an aggregate, all those like bells and whistles that you're dropping on, and looked at them as like spending up on some core foods? And instead of saying, okay, I'm going to supplement with all this stuff and then, eat all this fake non-bread bread. Well, what about if you just, like I get the flour from the place, spend more for it, make biscuits once a week, and it can be pretty healthy. There's another way of looking at things instead of this culture of like, I don't eat this, I don't eat that, I don't eat this, I don't eat that. It's like we're avoiding those things because they're tainted, not because they in and of themselves are bad. We've confounded things. Meat, we avoid it because we think it's terrible for our health. It's not in and of itself bad for our health. In history, people couldn't make flour out of coconuts.
That's true. Yeah. That's
like we're doing lots of things now and highly manufactured ways of going about things to get our daily nutrition that are actually highly processed, right? Which we know in general is not good for us. And also just like probably not necessary, so it's like, let's revisit going to a more fundamental, essential way of eating, but do it in a way that's super clean. And listen, I enjoy the heck out of like, I have some in my kitchen right now, Misfit Bakery, coconut almond buns that are like bread, but they're not bread. And they kind of itch, scratch my bread itch. And
sure,
like,
I have those. Yeah.
I go low carb. And so, I'm not saying that like I eat bread every day. I'm just saying it's like for an occasional treat, it's great. But we don't have to go so extreme in having like fake everything. If we want those things, we can bring them into our lives, but just try to find sources from them that are really clean.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. I want to jump into when I go shopping. Now you see a lot of meats that has the word grass fed. Can that be confusing? I mean, is there a definition for that? And then is there a definition for grass finished as well?
Yeah. So grass fed means the animal spent some time on grass. And really every animal in the US is grass fed because for the first 6 months of an animal's life, it's in the US cattle system. It's at what's called a cow-calf operation, which is where you have cows. So that cow means a female beef, a female animal. And so typically it's cows and steers in the industry, and then the animals are called beef, but a cow is a female beef, and a cow is raised on usually like a dirt and grass lot. And it's female. I mean, it's amazing. Just like humans, they'll put all of their energy into their offspring. So you don't actually have to feed them great food, the moms, to have healthy offspring, because they will, just like human females, put all the same reason that women like have problems with their teeth during pregnancy. It's like if your body needs calcium, it'll pull out. So you don't actually, there's no great incentive to treat the mother cows particularly well. We do, but like a lot of operations run really lean because the moms will produce great offspring no matter what. So they're typically kept on kind of like very low grade pasture, and they'll be nursing on the moms until like 5 or 6 months. So that's grass. It's on grass. Technically, you might have a bite or two grass in that time. So grass fed is meaningless in that context. It's actually a willful manipulation of the consumer. Grass finished means that they actually gained all of their weight on grass. So when they get off the udder and they stop eating milk, they then need to start eating something. And they either are going to eat grain or grass. So if they eat grain, then that can be a grass-fed and grain-finished animal. If they eat grass, then that's actually the more meaningful part of their life. It's depending on the operation, between 10 and 20 months of their life on grass. That's very expensive. That's like 5 times as expensive as raising them on corn because corn is subsidized and very cheap. So grass finishing is really costly. You have to be careful. There are feedlots that finish on grass, and they do that with a grass seed pellet, which is just a really sleazy workaround in my estimation, because it's basically like pelletized. I mean, a grass seed is not that different from a grain. It's technically like botanically different, but it's high in omega-6s. It's not, I mean, grasses don't seed with the ratio that like corn does, where it produces a lot of it. So the grass seed in the natural diet is extremely minimal amount of the diet. So if you're feeding the animal grass seed pellet, you're going to get weight gains that aren't as aggressive as they are on corn, but they're not that far off. So
go ahead.
Actually look for pasture, free range, and grass finished. And then also check out your operation. It's like if you go to the website of an operation and they don't have detail about how they're finishing on grass or where they're finishing on grass, you ask questions. Because I'm aware of a few of them in my region where we farm that are literally just finishing animals on grass pellets. Also, if you have grass-fed meat that's extremely marbled, be also like suspicious.
Okay.
It's very difficult. I mean, we know this from ourselves. It's like if we're eating just like spinach and high fiber, low calorie stuff, no matter if you're a monogastric or a ruminant, it's difficult to put on a ton of fat. So grass-fed animals can put on fat when they're very old, like 4 or 5 years old. I've seen extremely marbled ones, especially like old mamas that have been out at pasture for a long time. They can do that, but you can't. It's in the time frame of a conventional beef animal, like 24 to 26 months. You're not going to get a very high marble on grass. So if it's super fatty regularly, like occasionally, like Belcampo, every once in a while we'll have a rack come through that's like prime, beautiful, highly marbled. The genetics are crazy. They're on some super sweet pasture, whatever happened, that happens. But if it's like consistently an operation that says our grass-fed and finished is super high, like I know one that markets extensively in Southern California as a grass-finished operation, but they're feeding it sorghum to finish. Okay, sorghum is technically a grass in the same way that sugarcane is technically a grass.
Oh, that's a loophole right there.
That's like, great, you're finding a high sugar grass. So like it's also a non-regulated term. You have to get approval from an agency at the USDA called FSIS, but that's not a very rigorous approval process. It's the same agency that allows Tyson to use the word natural in all their products.
Oh yeah, I mean, you see natural thrown everywhere. Is pasture raised regulated? Because okay.
Yeah, pasture raised has a specific designation. So the difference here is like a term like grass-fed, there's any number of different ways that you can satisfy that requirement. When you use the word pastured, there's actually a square feet per animal and an outdoors access that's mandated. So it's very specific. So that is regulated. So pastured or pasture raised or free range is less so. Free range is actually misused. I think that the regulations for that term were not developed with the consumer's interest in mind, because free range means that they have to have access to the outdoors.
Yeah, there's a door in the hen house, but it doesn't mean they're going out.
So pastured means that they actually have a place they can go inside too, but they live outdoors, right?
Okay.
So for pastured animals, typically what we do with our pastured animals is we want them to have a place, if they're egg laying animals, where they can roost and really protect their young. But for our meat birds, they have just a hoop house so that they're protected from predators. Like at nighttime, they go inside, they stay warm, they're protected from predators, but all day long, they are outside. And then they can go in, they will go in, and they prefer to be outside. They're all over the place. And then if I show up or you show up, they kind of go and cluster together and they go under their little roof, but when you're not there, they're out enjoying pecking around for stuff and looking and digging and finding worms. And then, the usual kind of like bird stuff. So
but pasture raised doesn't mean it's automatically organic, right?
No.
Okay. But it's premium though over organic in your opinion. Is that correct?
Yeah, I actually prefer pastured. If I have to choose at the grocery store for poultry, my number one preference is pastured. And then, the best is pastured and organic. Okay. Second best is pastured. And if a bird is just organic, I won't buy it typically. I'll eat something else because organic can be confinement. There aren't actual husbandry and confinement requirements around the word organic. So
Because
you
it's the
want
organic grain, right? It doesn't mean organic
organic,
living.
be debeaked. They can't be in cages, but that's like a pretty low bar, right?
Right, right. They can still be
Um,
stuffed into a hen house, which is like a cage.
yeah. So I'm looking for pastured, I'm looking for organic, pasture number one, and organic and a certified humane. But ideally it's pastured and organic. And if it's not, it has to be pastured. And if there's a choice where there's an organic certified bird that's not pastured and a pastured bird, I will choose a pastured bird. It's a better quality of product for my wellness because the muscle fibers are better developed. It's a slower growing animal. Because here's the newsflash: the more you let animals move around, the slower they grow. We know this from ourselves, right? The more
Yeah, I
exercise
mean, I
they
just got educated on that in the last 30, 40 minutes. So
it's a lot of move. So the animal, I want them moving around more than anything. And then it's like, so what if they're eating non-organic grain? Their body's pretty good at processing those chemicals out for me. You know, it's an amazing thing about animals. They do
yeah.
do a lot of heavy metal processing for you, so they can handle it. But of course, I would like it to be organic as well, because I also want to support organics broadly. And then for beef, it's a little bit different. Beef, I'm looking for grass-fed and grass-finished, or 100% grass-fed is another logo that I'll be looking for as the top, and organic would be second.
Well, 100% grass fed, they can still play with the loopholes, right? But
Yeah,
at least it's better than
yeah.
organic or not, regular
It,
meat.
it just has the word grass-fed. That's a real red flag. I want to
Okay.
say grass-fed and finished, or 100% grass-fed. And then beyond that, I'm looking for the name of the farm and whether or not their practices are verified. So
I sometimes, well, I not sometimes, when I buy lamb, I usually at the store try to get it from New Zealand. Is that helping at all? Do you know much about the New Zealand agriculture
yeah, I mean, New
methods?
Zealand lamb is pastured. There are lamb feedlots in New Zealand, though. And part of the reason why New Zealand has such small lambs is that lamb doesn't do well in feedlots. It develops a lot of stress flavor, like lamminess and gaminess. In confinement animals, the lamb develops that faster than other species because it's a very wild species. It's the first domesticated animal. So it's the most similar to wild, because when we domesticated lamb, we weren't like as good at domestication as we are now, right? We didn't quite fully tame it. So physiologically, it behaves more like a game in confinement. It's the rangiest, it's the wildest, it's the most, it'll eat the widest range of species of any of grass species. Of goat does a little bit more than that, but lamb is a extremely, like, it's rather close to a wild animal in how it adapts. So they don't do well in confinement. So as a result, they're slaughtered very young to ensure that the meat isn't gamey. So if you see those like lamb chops, those New Zealand lamb chops that are like
Yeah.
tiny,
Yeah.
that's in part because they're trying to work around slightly stressful handling conditions. So
All right. So it's
that's
not
not,
the best meat, but might be. I don't know. I thought, in other
I
words, you
mean,
have to do your research. You have to look at the
I
meat
think,
source again.
and also, New Zealand it's GMO free. It's
Right.
the huge organic movement there. It's a great area and it's got great climate for pasture. And I'm sure if there's some type of confinement, I don't know enough about this to speak to their industry.
Okay.
From what I've seen and heard, I have a friend who was involved in that industry and went there and said it was amazing and everything it was set up to be. So it's like, I think my preference would be I personally like the taste of like mild older lamb that are raised with low stress, like ours are. But I think if, another great option, if you can't get Belcampo product, we're actually producing less and less lamb because as we grow, the percentage of people who like lamb, it's very,
Yeah, it's
young.
small. It's not a Western meat, that's for
No,
sure.
I love it. I love it. I eat so much lamb, but it's just not super popular. But Atkins Ranch up in Oregon is a fantastic provider. And
Okay,
that'd be
because I see those meat around. Okay.
yeah. I think there may be a New Zealand one too, but I think it's called Atkins. There's a family ranch up in Oregon. There's a few West Coast providers at scale. There's
How
some
about
in,
Eel River? Does that ring a bell? Eel River?
I know you were for beef. That's a
Okay.
wholesaler. It's not an actual ranch. It's a aggregation, which doesn't mean it's bad. It just doesn't mean that it's like doesn't have the same type of origin. We also work with partner farms, but we make it fully traceable to EU as a consumer, and we also still take the animals onto our property in beef and then slaughter them in our plant. So we basically buy live animals, finish them, and then we only buy from regenerative organic ranches. So we have that. It's a small part of our program right now, but as we grow, we already are 30,000 acres for Belcampo, so we can't really get that much bigger and manage it in a sustainable kind of way. So
Sure.
But yeah, I definitely think for lamb, look for grass-fed and finished. Don't know enough about the New Zealand product to know about it. But I do think from a taste perspective, if you like the flavor of lamb, you should look for a very low stress producer that is offering older animals, because you're going to get just an incredibly more complex, rich flavor.
Okay, I'll definitely look into that. Anya, we only have a couple more minutes, so I have a few more questions and that'll be it. Let's see here. If you had $100 million and you had to allocate into research, what would you do with it?
It absolutely be about nutrition, and how the micronutrient profile and nutrition. There isn't enough, we have a sense, I feel like we see the landscape of wellness and health as related to food. It's like black and white. And in my experience, there's so much more shading and color to things. So I personally note that my health response to foods is radically different depending on like where it's from, and lots of other factors, and often how it's grown. And so I it's like an apple's not an apple, and there's a different body response to different types of apples in my experience. And I'm interested in knowing more about the why of that, because I think that connecting the dots for people around the micronutrients and the health of how things are grown and their impact on your body is crucial. And that's something I'd love to see more of.
Is there, because when you do your testing for your meats compared to the others, I know we talked about omega-3 and 6 ratio, but do you test for the fat soluble vitamins to see if there's a difference in potency? Do you do that?
We're just starting to do that right
Okay.
now. Great question. And we're looking at protein density and the vitamins, and also BPAs and heavy metals.
Sure.
Just starting to test. And I'm actually setting my website up now so that there's going to be an archive of third-party testing on all of our.
Oh, wow. You can't beat that. I mean, can you talk about it now? Do you see changes it, or are you kind of still in the middle of doing the testing?
Roundup data in like this week, and I don't have it complete. I have my competitive set in, but not mine. So I'm just on the edge of it, but I'll be like screaming it from the rooftops once I get it.
I'm sure it's going to be looking pretty good. That's exciting, because that really brings up the transparency, and you're like, hey, look at the reports. You don't have to listen to me. Here's the lab tested. The last question: if you had to send a tweet to everybody around the whole world, what would it be?
Oh man. I would just like pay attention.
Hey, it's simple and effective.
Well, people are too checked out. They're checked out about so many different things, and they're kind of just too trusting that everything that's being served to them is okay. And it's like, pay attention, be critical, like we got one life. And I think we're not like engaged enough in what really matters right now.
Yeah, because sometimes it takes work and effort, and everybody's sidetracked doing their TikTok videos. Who knows?
It's important. Yeah.
Well, Anya from Belcampo, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. It's sort of the last 45 minutes. I learned a lot. There's going to be a lot more research I want to do just because of talking to you. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks.